Unanimous.
So we're going to start off the workshop tonight. It's a presentation on the completed wastewater study by Public Works Director Peter Owen. Have you come back up? And then I think that we'll be shuffled out of here in a matter of moments.
Good evening. For the record, for the public, my name is Peter Owen. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Bath. And I'm really happy to speak tonight about something other than snow. And that subject is wastewater tonight. I'm here to try to explain some of the issues of why this is important. I think everyone is familiar with the concept of wastewater, but very few people are familiar after it leaves your house. And I'm going to try to shed some light on that a little bit tonight, try to give a wastewater 101 and the status of the city's wastewater facilities. So why is it important? The city operates a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant that processes over 2 million gallons per day. In addition, there are 13 pump stations and over 40 miles of sewer pipelines. Collectively, the pipes collect the sewer, the pump stations transport it to the pump stations, and the pump station takes care of the treatment. All combined, it is probably the city's most valuable asset. The second reason is important that everyone uses it every day. Yet it's an asset that most people take for granted. As the largest asset in the city, it's pretty much invisible. You flush a toilet, you take a shower, you wash your hands, and you never give it a second thought. The reality is that it's a system that operates 24/7, 365 days a year without interruption. But when there is an interruption, the expectation is that it will be repaired immediately. And for those who have had that interruption, it is a traumatic event that most people experience and call the city right away and expect it fixed without question. It's unacceptable to say, well, we didn't fund that this year. The third reason is there's an environmental impact when systems fail. Uncontrolled releases of sanitary waste into the environment is unacceptable. Yet we have systems that are not perfect, that operate most of the time very well, but other times has disturbing overflows that have become far too familiar to some areas of the city. To understand the troubled areas, it helps to understand sort of the origins of our system. Our treatment plant was built in 1971. It's hard to imagine that when this city was first founded until 1971, that all of its wastewater was dumped into the Kennebec River. I remember being 10 years old, 1966, and canoeing down the Kennebec River and being told by my camp counselors, whatever you do, don't fall into the river. Because the river was the discharge point for all the mills, all the industry, and every single town along the Kennebec River. And it's just amazing to me to think in our lifetimes that's the way it was. When you were a kid, that's the way it was. So when the treatment plant was built, prior to the treatment plant was being built, there were 31 pipes that ran down to the river. And there was no reason to separate storm from sanitary because it all went to one place. It all just went into the river. When the treatment plant was built, suddenly now all this stuff was collected and it was pumped, and the treatment plant became the receiving end. But the problem is when you have rainstorms, as I think a lot of the council has probably dealt with and some of the problems you've heard about, we get this wave of water. And when it hits the pipelines can't handle, they're not designed to handle a 10 or a 25 or a 50-year storm event. They're sized to take the 2 million gallons per day of sewage that the city generates. But when it rains, you add this extreme amount of water to the system. The system can receive so much of it, but when you get so much in a short amount of time, it backs up. And that's when we have these problems. To protect the pump stations and the treatment plant, we have what are called combined sewer overflows, because we have a combined system, meaning it's combined stormwater and sanitary. That's the way the system was put together originally, and since 1980, we've been doing these separation projects, where what we try to do is run a pipeline from the river up to certain streets where we can collect the rainwater and it can then flow to the river. Unfortunately, there are many areas of the city where it's just has not been practical to try to blast through these hills of ledge. You think of Bath, it's up and down. And to try to get a pipeline through this by gravity just is not feasible economically. So we have areas of the city that still dump stormwater into the sanitary. And to protect the pump stations, there are these pipelines that when that water starts to build up or back up in the system so that it doesn't flood a pump station or doesn't flood a street, it discharges into a pipeline that goes down into the river. And that's called an overboard discharge. And when, in 1971, when the treatment plant was initially operated, there were 24 licensed CSO pipes running to the river. Today we have 5. And so over time, we've reduced these licensed CSO pipes. And when I say licensed, these are identified with DEP. We have to submit information on a regular basis that tells DEP how often we had an overboard discharge and the volume of that discharge. And they track it as they track all the what are called CSO communities. So the importance in understanding this is that we are under pressure, or we are under a direction to try to eliminate all of our CSO pipes. And that is the ultimate direction we are supposed to be going under the direction of DEP. We really can't or have not been able to eliminate those 5 CSOs because of the volume of water and just the configuration of our own system. We have places where the water still comes out in areas of neighborhoods or in the streets, and so we need an outlet. We need a place for that water to go, and that's what these other CSOs are. And you'll hear that term later on. So I mentioned in the memo that I sent out to the council that the last upgrade to the treatment plant was in 1997. So it's time to look and review our system. And we went through the process of hiring Wright-Pierce in 2012 to start the process of reviewing and inventorying all of our facilities and our problem areas. And they've spent the last year and a half doing some investigations and doing studies so that we could start to identify the problem areas, the things that need to be upgraded, and what is this going to cost. So I've asked Wright-Pierce to be here tonight and basically present sort of a summary of those studies. And I have here Chris Dwinell, who's an engineer with Wright-Pierce, and he's going to basically walk through their presentation.
Steve, as he's getting ready, we're hoping this could air quite a bit on BCTV. And there may be a vote in the fall, and if that's the case on a bond, then we'd want you to run it like
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Peter, for the introduction. Again, my name is Chris Dwinell. I work for Wright-Pierce. We're located in Topsom. I'm also joined this evening by Mike Sweat, as well as John Edgerton from Wright-Pierce as well, both who have been involved in the work that we've done over the past year and a half to 2 years for the city. Really appreciate the opportunity. We've been talking about giving this presentation now for quite some time, and looking forward to sharing some of our findings and work and what the future may hold for the wastewater collection and treatment system here in the city. Peter's done a nice job of overviewing the kind of the past, so I'll go over that somewhat quickly and then get into more of the present as well as the future. And some projects looking forward, what you should be expecting moving forward for funding requests, and some summary and recommendations. Peter mentioned the plant being built and a lot of the collection seats being built in 1971. And while there was some work done in the 80s, really this consent agreement from Maine DEP in 1992 to address those combined sewer overflows was really the starting point of a lot of work that happened within your collection system. It led to the development of what's known as a CSO master plan, essentially a large document that evaluates opportunities to be able to mitigate or eliminate those CSOs that you had. And at that time, I think there might have been 7 or so of them at that time, and you've got down 7 or 8 of them, and now you've got down to 5. That document led to a upgrade to the wastewater treatment facility, one in 1997, also one in 1993, which I'll show in the next slide. So the upgrades that were about now almost 18 years ago to your wastewater treatment facility, which included a provision to be able to treat some of that extraneous water. It also led to many subsequent updates to that plan, one of which was just recently submitted to Maine DEP in January of this year. And that's really just updating the work that's been done, what progress has been made in eliminating this extraneous flows and these CSOs that happen during wet weather events. And really this 1992 consent agreement has really driven a lot of the wastewater related work over the past 2 decades here in the city. Here's your wastewater treatment facility. Some people may be familiar with it. It's by the North End Boat Launch off Bowery Street. Very nice, very well-maintained facility by the city staff, Chris and his staff. As I mentioned, there was a 1993 upgrade that contemplated the dewatering system, the system that dewaters the solids. There was also a 1997 upgrade as well. That was the facility that was put in to be able to provide treatment or primary treatment for some of this extraneous water that makes it to the plant. As far as expenditures at the wastewater treatment facility, here's some figures for the 1993 and the 97 upgrades. The 1997 one, as you can see, was about a $5 million upgrade, and that results in a $315,000 annual payment that the city makes for 20 years. And I'll talk about that retirement on that in a few slides. Over the past 5 years, there's been approximately $100,000 a year spent, and I believe this is accurate. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris or Peter, that for this fiscal year, this current fiscal year, there's only about $87,000 allocated for capital improvements at the wastewater treatment facility. That's not to be confused with the operating and maintenance budget. That's obviously much larger. But this is for capital improvements, replacement of equipment and whatnot. So that was a history of the treatment plant, a little history of the collection system, which Peter already covered. In the early 80s, you started with doing some of this major separation work where you were taking stormwater lines and separating them from the sanitary lines. And that work actually came in anticipation of that CSO master plan that was done in 1993. So there was already a recognition that there was a lot of extraneous water getting into the system well before that plan was written. In the 90s, there were a number of large separation projects in Lambert Park, on Commercial Street and Center Street, and also some work that was done as part of the street improvements program. I think that was some sump pump removals and roof drain removal type programs to get those out of the sanitary system. In the 2000s, there were a number of CSO master plan updates and reassessment of where the city stood, and also implementing with any CSO master plan, you're required to do a number of things to try to minimize what's getting into the catch basins, like removing gravel off the streets, taking sand off the streets, trying to do some sort of catching of stuff that's coming out there, maintaining your infrastructure, making sure it stays in the pipe. So there's a number of things that need to be done. And those are just best management practices that are done with anyone that has a CSO in their town or community. Over the past 5 years, a good amount of money has been spent. This is particularly on the Howard Street pump station, $1.3 million spent there, and that was over the past 5 years. So there's been some money spent. And overall, when you look at all of the work on the collection system, and when I say pump stations, the pipeline, and CSO-related projects, the city has spent over nearly $2.5 million on that work over the past 7 years or so, 6 to 7 years. Here's just a listing of some of the projects that you have completed over the past 2 or 3 years. Green Street project, Willow Street project, and Winship Green projects. These are projects we were not specifically involved with, so if you have questions, Hope Peter can probably answer them better than I can. But just to give you a summary of the type of expenditures that you've had within your collection system to help minimize these CSOs. So, looking to the present and to the future, despite 22 years of work totaling over $10 million that you've spent on your wastewater collection system, both the treatment facility as well as the collection system. As Peter mentioned, there's still a number of areas that are still overwhelmed during wet weather. You still have active CSOs, and in fact, you still have some areas, as we talked about with Willow Street, and there's a couple of other areas where you have water getting to the ground surface out of the sanitary system. Every day that the system gets older, it gets in better, you need to continually maintain any asset you have, or it's just going to continue to get worse in time. The city's been doing a good job, but there's still some areas that need attention. 4 CSOs, the 5th one that Peter mentioned is actually the licensed one that's actually at the wastewater treatment facility as well. So that makes the 5 that you actually have. So that's actually 5 still remain active. Beyond the collection system, certainly with your pump stations and your wastewater plant that treats that 2 million gallons every day, there's equipment there that needs to be maintained. Just like a road that needs to be maintained or it wears out, the same thing goes with a pump or a building or a roof or anything at these facilities. And as Peter mentioned, while I don't know for sure, I would say that probably the wastewater system that you have here is, if it's not your number one asset in value, it's darn close to it, just because of the magnitude of the infrastructure that's there. And certainly for anyone that hasn't been down to the treatment plant or hasn't seen the facility, it may be something you want to set up a visit with Chris Wallace to go down there and see the facility that they operate or some of the pump stations. It's quite a bit to it. So while there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of work has been done and there's more to be done, the good news is that debt that I alluded to from the 1997 upgrade is being retired in 2017, and that's a $315,000 annual payment. If you look at that at a 2% interest, that's just over a $5 million project. So an opportunity really to do about $5 million worth of work once that debt has been retired without impacting your existing ratepayers. So that's some good news with regard to the wastewater collection system and the investments that are needed. Back in 2012, we started working for the city, taking a look at the wastewater collection system. The first task that we took on was a comprehensive assessment of the wastewater treatment facility on Bowery Street, as well as 5 pump stations located in the south end. And essentially that was, again, a comprehensive assessment of all the assets are there. How are they doing? Are they have enough capacity? Do they need replacement? Does the plant need additional capacity? Has it got enough capacity? What are the permitting things that are on the horizon that might impact the community? What are there for code-related issues with the buildings that were built back in the 90s? They may not be compliant with existing codes. So it was really a soup-to-nuts evaluation of the wastewater treatment facility as well as the 5 pump stations, in the 4 in the south end and the Aegis Drive one, which is across from the tennis courts. So that was the first evaluation we did, and that was finished up in April 2013, and that developed, I'll talk about them in a moment, a number of phased upgrades to the facility, things that could be done not all at once, but over time. The next evaluation we did, I know it's kind of, you weren't intended to be able to read the text here, was to take a look at so much work had been done within the collection system, all these CSO master plan updates, all these various projects, $10 million worth of expenses. Let's try to get our arms around what we have done, how effective it's been, where the flows are hitting now, what CSOs are seeing the worst impacts, and where we should apply some of our emphasis moving forward. So this was a fairly focused effort, fairly short-term, small study to kind of wrap our arms around all that that had been done. Following on that work, we determined that really the south end area, the Hunt Street and the Rose Street pump stations, while work had been done back in the 90s to take a look at those and the CSO that's down there, which is at the Rose Street pump station, not much time and effort had been spent in the south end of Bath on this CSO issue or the collection system issue over the past 20 years. So we embarked on a study down there to really evaluate what was causing the CSO down there, as well as what's called a sanitary sewer overflow, basically wastewater coming through a manhole onto the surface of the street, because that does occur in extreme storms in one location down there. So taking a look at that, we also did smoke testing, basically putting smoke up the pipe and determining where there might be cracks in the pipes, roof drains connected, sump pumps connected, whatever we can find. The good news is we found some areas where there's always some surprises when you do stuff like that. And through this study, we made some, and I'll talk about them and some of the planned recommended upgrades down there, is to continue to do some evaluation and some TV inspection of the pipes down there to get a real sense. It's a pretty big network. There's a lot of pipes in the south end of Bath. It went all the way from the top of the hill by Week Street on Washington, from there basically up to High Street and all the way down to pretty much Graffham Way or Riverview area. So that was the extent of the area that we studied. So a pretty large area. We also recommended some improvements within the collection system to try to minimize extraneous water that's getting in there, water that's getting in from cracks in pipes. It could be sump pumps, any other way that water can get into the collection system. And the reason we want to do that is because these pump stations pump to each other. The Hunt Street pump station, as you may know from the pumps to the Rose Street pump station. So any flow that you add to the Hunt Street pump station is going to have an impact on Rose Street. Right now, Rose Street has an overflow pipe that overflows during wet weather to the river. If you add any more flow to Hunt, it's going to add more to Rose, which means more to the river, which is not something that the regulatory agencies typically like to hear about. So we looked at options to be able to try to reduce water into the system and then possibly bypass that Rose Street pump station so you can actually pump around it and avoid the need to upgrade both of those stations when you do something from Hunt Street south. A lot of details on the recommendations there, and those are I'll talk a little bit about in coming slides. And the most recent thing that we completed for the city was just in January of this year, and really it was the goal of this study, or the end goal was to come up with a CSO master plan update. And there's been many of them that have been done over the years, and it's something that DEP tends to like to see every 5 years or so. The last one was done in January of 2011, so it was actually 4 years. But because there's been more work done, a better understanding of things like the Willow Street area, it was an opportune time to be able to update DEP on what have we done, what have we taken off the list, what have we added to the list, and what needs to be done over the next 10 years or so. So that document was just submitted, like I said, in January. It's about a 16-page document. I'll hit on a few of those projects in the next few slides. Other things that have been going on, you heard earlier about the Green Infrastructure Grant and the modeling work that was done, looking at the possibility of getting extraneous water out of the sewer line that runs down the railroad tracks from Willow Street to Center Street. And that study is in draft form right now and is being updated to final form. The city's working directly with EPA and EPA's consultant for that grant. The city has also completed some closed circuit television work within the collection system, Juniper Street, Park Street area. I think this work has been done or it's ongoing. Is that correct, Lee? And I believe there's plans to do more. But that's really you get a real good understanding of what's going on in your collection system when you go out especially during wet weather, you can see how much clean water is coming down people's laterals, and that has a good indication of sump pumps being tied in. You also just, whether you had CSOs in your community or not, being able to see the inside of your pipe and understand where your needs truly are is very important. And that's really an ongoing thing. That's not necessarily something that should be done from time to time. Really going out and doing this, a small portion of your collection system every year, is a really important thing to do. So looking forward, that was kind of an update on what Wright-Pierce has done since 2012 for the city. Through the completion of the evaluation of the wastewater treatment facility and the 5 pump stations that we looked at, as well as the study looking at the south end, as well as past work that's been done by the city, we've come up with a listing of projects that we envision happening over the next several years. And a number of those are in that CSO master plan that has already been submitted to Maine DEP. So over the next few years, or next 2 years, this year and next year, a number of critical path CSO abatement projects. So the big focus over the next couple of years is going to be projects within the collection system, one of them being Willow Street, that area, Juniper and Park area, where there's also been some overflow issues, and starting some work down in the south end as a result of the study that we did in the Hunt and Rose Street drainage areas. One of the projects down there is, in fact, and Peter's not close enough to kick me, but while no one likes to hear that we're going to reopen an old CSO that was closed many, many years ago, we've done it in a couple of communities. And in this particular case, we're recommending it down in that area. And the reason is it's better to have wastewater go into the river than it is to go to a street where it can have human contact. So we're going to be looking into the possibility of opening up one where the system is currently overwhelmed right now. That's going to allow us to be able to flow meter that and understand just truly how much water is going out of the system. And that'll allow us to be able to design improvements there so that we can minimize that in the future. So the big focus over the next couple of years within the collection system is going to be, and there's 7 different projects that we're going to be looking at, the city will be looking at over that time frame. There's also some needed upgrades at the treatment facility over the next couple of years. On the left, what you see is a belt filter press. That's for squeezing basically the water out of the solids that are collected at the treatment plant. And as the solids go to your landfill, the water just goes back into the treatment plant for treatment. That's a 20-plus-year-old piece of equipment now. It was put in 1993. There's a huge amount of investment that would be required to keep that equipment operational, up over $100,000. Now, when you start talking about that kind of investment, you start determining, is it worth putting that money into the system, or looking at a newer technology that can dry the solids more. Also on the right is the bottom of your aeration tank. If you drive down, you can see the tanks where there's a lot of bubbles coming up. That's your biological process that treats your wastewater. There's a need to replace those diffusers, which is what you can see, those air diffusers at the bottom of the tank, and a few other upgrades that are necessary over the short term at the treatment plant. Moving ahead to the 2017 to 2019 window, there's 9 more CSO projects that are listed in the CSO master plan update. Some of these projects are not the largest projects in the world. They can be very small projects, but suffice to say there's, I think, 24 total projects that were in that letter that went to Maine DEP. So we're trying to break them up over time, not to spread out the cost, but also to spread out the cost, but also do the highest priority ones first. And also, as recommended in our 3 of the pump stations, we recommended upgrades: the Riverview pump station, the Bridge Street pump station, and the Aegis pump station. And as you can see from the photo on the right, there's quite a bit of corrosion going on in that pump station. These pump stations date back to 1969 and 1971, with very little upgrades, if any, that have been done over that time frame. So there's some needs there. Looking even further forward, the treatment plan in 2020 is going to be 23 to 28 years old because the equipment was upgraded in 93 and 97. There's a lot of equipment there, just like anything that's going to wear out and need replacement. So within our study, we had recommended a more comprehensive upgrade to the plant to kind of touch every area in the plant, a lot of the mechanical equipment, some stuff that's just worn out from dealing with grit and solids, wear and tear. And if you go to the treatment plant, you'll see the kind of environment that the equipment operates in. It's a very tough duty. It's really an industrial type facility. So there's a number of upgrades recommended, again, looking at code-related issues. We've pushed out the pump station upgrades in the south end. Those are the Hunt and Rose ones, the major pump station upgrades down the road a little bit, to allow more time to be able to try to take some water out of the system. Before we go make a pump station so big to handle all this water, why don't we try to take some of the water out first so it doesn't need to be as large? Or we have more capacity for development. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, the pump station at Winnigan's,
Hmm.
what does that do?
Bridge to Bridge Street pump station? Yeah, that pumps up to, basically up to Weber Street. It collects the water from that area along, probably from where Graffham Way and Riverview come up, from there south to Winnegans, and the area right around that Winnegans area. I'm not sure if it goes up. Does it head up the hill? Gravity line down over the hill.
That photo on the right was Bridge Street.
Oh, this one right here was Bridge Street Pump Station.
On the right,
So that, yep,
on the right.
on the right, yeah.
On the right.
The one on the right is the Bridge Street Pump Station. It's not a large pump station. It's a fairly small pump station, but it serves that fairly small area right around there.
I'm just curious.
But that would be an area, if you looked at upgrading that pump station, you'd want to understand what potential there might be for any additional development in that area and right-size that pump station. Of course, that pumps into Hunt Street and Rose Street. So if you make that bigger, it could, increase the problem. So
I was
you
just
need.
wondering where it went, so it does pump up to...
It does pump up to pretty much Weber and High Street. Yeah. So we talked about the major pump station upgrades, and major, fairly substantive pump station upgrades. They're the brick buildings that you drive by when you go down Washington Street, Rose and Hunt Street. Those are a couple of the larger pump stations the city actually has. And the remaining 8 CSO projects. There's 8 more projects. I think it's kind of too early at this point to say, yeah, we know for certain we're going to do those 8 projects, because you're going to do 16 or 17 more before that. That may go a long way towards solving a lot of your problems. While you still may have to do projects in 2020, it may not be those 8 projects. It may be something else, because we keep reassessing every 5 years. So probably around 2020, we'd be looking at doing another update and saying, are these really the right projects to do, or should we be investing somewhere else? We've talked a lot about capital. We talked a little bit about the CCTV work, post-camera television work, TV work within the system. It's not only all about capital, the investments that you make. There's obviously your operating maintenance budget associated with the treatment plant, but there's a lot of costs every year that deal with pipeline cleaning and inspection and replacement. Going out and taking a look at, geez, we did this project in this collection system. Did we do a good job? How much water did we get out in a comparable storm? The smoke testing that I mentioned. Maintaining right-of-ways. While it's nice to have pipes that always run down streets, they don't all run down streets. Some of them are cross-country, so you have to maintain those. You don't want trees and roots growing down into your pipes. And certainly there's needs for equipment and personnel to do this work. So while that's not really part of a capital request, it's just something you should be aware of, that there are needs, like with anything, sweeping the street, cleaning the sewer line. There's things that need to be done from time to time to maintain what's a very important piece of infrastructure for the city. As part of the work that we've done and as part of the work that's been done previously, what we did was we put together some numbers based on, again, these are study level numbers based on the studies that we've done, to estimate some of the costs that the city could be looking at for upgrades to the treatment plant, to the pump stations, as well as work for CSOs. For the next couple of years, we talked about the dewatering upgrade and the aeration upgrade at the treatment plant. Those are fairly substantive upgrades, nearly $5 million, or just over $5 million. Not really a lot of work at the pump stations over the next couple of years. There may be a few things in your CIP, a pump that broke down that needed to be replaced, but fairly limited over the next couple of years. and a little over $1 million in those collection system projects that we talked about. Moving ahead to the 2017 to 2019 window, little or no work at the treatment plant, taking a little break at the treatment plant, focusing more on the pump stations and the collection system. Again, not a huge amount in those years compared to the previous 2 years or the 2020 to 25 window. Looking at that 2020 to 2025 window, those numbers are probably the numbers we know the least about at this point because they're that far down the road. A lot of that money in the pump station, the $2.2 to $7 million, really has a lot to do with the success of some of the collection system work we do in the next few years. We may find that $7 million is not necessary. It may be something closer to the low end. Suffice to say, we've carried a range in there. And the goal is not to scare anyone here. The goal is to let you know that it's a large piece of infrastructure. If you had to replace your wastewater treatment facility and all the infrastructure that you have, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. So I have a few notes at the bottom. A couple of things that aren't included, and these are don't include operation and maintenance costs of the wastewater system. These are just capital costs. And we did this presentation back in October. I just didn't update the numbers to February, so it's as of October. So obviously a lot of some larger numbers there, and again, that's something that city staff will be coming forward with recommendations, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about bond or you want me to bring that up.
Bill,
Okay.
talk about that a little later.
Okay, sounds good. And I can go back to put the costs up, but as I mentioned before, the city and your city staff do an excellent job of keeping the treatment plant, the collection system, and the pump stations functioning 24/7, 365 days a year to get wastewater to the plant and treated, meeting its permit and into the river. Even with all that work, though, there's capital upgrades that are necessary from time to time. I think specifically when you look at street projects or projects within the collection system, it's important to look at areas where, we may be doing, example, the North Street project. We're doing a project to replace the surface of North Street and change the streetscape there. Why don't we separate out these 5 basins as well? So we're able to do kill two birds with one stone in that regard. And obviously, my next slide is some funding opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities, some of them through Maine DEP with the Clean Water SRF program, and even opportunities to get some principal forgiveness on the principal that you have. Best I can tell, with the city's population being under 10,000, as far that you should be able to go after rural development loan grant packages, and those can be fairly lucrative as far as the grant component, depending on how you score in the community on a number of various factors. We talked earlier about CDBG funding, and you're going to be looking to use that for the North Street project. There's other opportunities there, some state and tribal assistance grants, STAG grants. Efficiency Maine, you're certainly familiar with that, and that probably would apply mostly to the treatment plant or any pump station upgrades. You may get opportunity. There's a lot of money. Efficiency Maine has a lot of money, and it's your money. It's all of our money that we put into our rates for electric that they've put back into the program. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And I threw up the EPA green infrastructure one. You're familiar with that with the Willow Street work. So while there's some large numbers here, there's also some assistance available to be able to help you do this more affordably. And also, as you recall, you have $315,000 annual payment in 2017 that's being retired. That equates to about a $5 million project, a little bit better than a $5 million loan without any rate increase or impacts. That's all I had. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you have. I know we covered a lot of material.
Hey, Chris.
Hi.
Quick one for you. One of your slides is the solids press.
Yes.
Which we've seen in action. Pretty amazing piece of equipment there. You're saying that needs to be replaced and gone to something that's going to make it drier?
Yeah.
What do we do with that material when our landfill is full and capped and no longer in operation? Is that something that piece of equipment can be replaced with something it makes it more affordable for us to truck it over the road to somewhere else, or to be able to use it in a different manner in composting or something, or?
Over the past 10 years, there's been a huge change in the industry of dewatering solids at wastewater treatment facilities. This technology that you had was very common at the time that it was put in. There are a number of newer technologies out there that can wring a lot more water out of those solids. And if you're going to be trucking it long distance or somewhere other than the city of Bath, which is likely, the more water you can get out of it, the less you're going to pay at that facility to take it, because you're going to have less tons, and you're also going to be making less trips. So there's an opportunity there to be able to get a better return on investment, because you're actually taking more water out.
If we use that machine, does it get it to a point where it can go to one of the composting facilities of the state?
You could go to a composting facility now.
We can.
Yeah, you could go now, but if you dry it out more, it's less expensive because you're paying for less tons of water. Treatment plant's great at treating water. Takes the water and sends it to the river clean. So there's some new advances in technologies there that certainly the city would want to look at. It probably would not be moving forward with this technology right here. We don't put many of these in anymore, or see many communities doing it.
Good question. Anybody else have any questions? I think it might be hard to visualize some of these things if you haven't had a tour of the wastewater treatment plants.
Yeah, if you haven't had a tour, just give Chris Wallace a call and he'll set one up for you.
That's what he wants.
Yeah. But it's interesting stuff, and
It is.
it's not just the plant, but it's the pump stations, and so it's good for you to know. You know, people say, well, replace a pump. Bernie was saying this earlier, you know, you might go get a pump for your house for $150. Well, ours are several $100,000. So it's a major scale.
We just replaced a chain that was an absurd amount of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, our next step will be to start to put together with Julie what amount we'll borrow when, certainly along the guidelines they've set up, and how we can structure the debt service payments and the funds to address those debt service payments. It's going to be a variety of different methods. Certainly, whatever we can do with grants and low-interest loans. We'll want a bond to go to the voters probably in November because this will not fit under the expenditure limitation. It'll have to go to the voters, and it should. The $315,000 in 3 years that comes off the books, we'll be looking to reuse. We'll still utilize that, so it won't come off the books. It'll just flow into the debt service payment for what we're going to borrow this fall. It's likely that we can use some of the new TIF funds that we have, and there will have to be some property tax dollars that go into it. It is, not all of this is a sewer issue. So Peter's laughing because I cringe when I have to say that usually, but you know, this is not all sewer. This is stormwater as well, and so you can't put the entirety of it on the sewer rates. So it'll be a little bit complicated, but we'll come to you with that. We'll probably get here for action for you in, I would think, around August timeframe, so that Mary can have it buttoned up for the vote in November with everything else. So encourage people that your constituents and other people that you know to watch this presentation. Steve's going to run it a lot so that they can make themselves knowledgeable about it and understand what we're talking about.
Okay, one more question of Chris while he's still up there. I look at the 2025 number, and it's a ways off, but not that far. Have you looked at and thought about sea level rising and completely replacing that plant down there in the future? And if we have thought about it, would you do it in such a manner that you could do it with 2 or 3 smaller treatment centers, so we wouldn't have to pump stuff up, down, up, over, and back around, and then to the north end?
We didn't specifically look at what you described as far as looking at decentralized treatment or having multiple stations at multiple locations, certainly a number of communities. We see that in a lot of communities that don't have sewer systems, that are looking to build them. Why do I pump it so far? And think about Harpswell as an example, a community where if you had to build a treatment plant down there, it'd be in multiple locations. As far as sea level rise, we've certainly, I know John's done a lot of work, we're doing a lot of work for various communities looking at the impact of sea level rise on infrastructure. We didn't specifically look at it for the facility, although I know that we looked at it for the Hunt Street pump station,
right,
because as you've been down there, you know how low that is, and looked at some potential sea levels that you could see. And again, if you looked at any of this stuff, you can see how much the predictions can vary, over the next 80 years or so, 1 foot to 6 or 7 feet difference in sea level. So I think to do that, I would look strongly at trying to revet what you have right there and be able to protect what investment you have at that current location, because to try to spread that out would be, if I had to guess today, I would say a lot more money than trying to protect the investment that you have there now. But that would have to be looked at a little bit closer. But
Thank you.
Yep, sure.
You mentioned that that Peter probably wouldn't like it too much, that opening up one of those. Now, would that be, in opening it up, is there a timeline of how long that would have to stay open, or that there's like a time when it could be closed again, so we can kind of get back down to the lower number?
Before you could open it back up, you'd have to go to Maine DEP. It's been included in the report that we wrote, and it's been discussed in the CSO master plan, so they're well aware of the plan to do that. But you'd have to amend your permit that you have, because now your permit contemplates the CSO at the plan and 4 other remote ones. This would be a 5th remote one. So you would need to go through that process. Just like any CSO that you have, you would need to come up with a plan to try to mitigate and eliminate that. For all of your CSOs that you have, there's no set timeline right now. Yeah, we have projects going out to 2025, and the hope is always that at the end of that time, there's not going to be any more CSOs during wet weather events. But there's no timeline per se on each and every, by this date you must do this. You don't have a consent order saying you have to do that. They are licensed overflow points. You're allowed to overflow from there, with the understanding that over time you're going to do your best and you're going to invest ratepayer dollars in trying to eliminate that. It'll become part of a future CSO master plan, that CSO. And we already have plans within the work that we did down there to try, once we understand how much water is going out through that, what was used to be a CSO there, plans to try to quickly mitigate that. And the hope is with taking out extraneous water and upgrading the pump stations, that you could make quick progress toward doing that, because no one likes to open back up one that was closed before. But sometimes you're aggressive about trying to close it. We've done a good thing here, but sometimes it may be just a little bit, frankly, just a little bit too early.
And just kind of follow up, I don't know if you know, or Peter, do you know when that particular one that you're looking at to reopen was closed?
In the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Late 80s, early. So it's been closed for quite some time now. And there may have been a lot of time when what's happening down there now wasn't happening. But as the pipes down there have gotten worse and worse condition and more water is getting into them, a problem that didn't exist back then has created itself. So just more water.
Sorry to keep you working, Chris, but you're doing such a great job.
No, that's all right.
So did you
That's what I'm
find,
here
you said you did find a fair amount of, with your smoke testing, a fair amount of leaks and cracks and...
In a few areas, yeah. We found some actually right by the Hunt Street pump station, further ones up toward Cherry Street and up in that area, the one that drains. We found for each of the 2 pump stations one concentrated area where there were some catch basins tied in, as well as some old pipes that may have been abandoned that are just allowing a lot of, in wet areas, that are allowing a lot of water in. For the rest of the area, from that area south, it was less discernible in those areas. There seemed to be pretty much water coming from everywhere. but not as much findings with the smoke testing, which is why we recommended, when you don't find a lot with the smoke testing, that doesn't mean that there isn't water getting in there. There may be sump pumps tied in, but they may be coming through traps. And the smoke just doesn't go, you don't find the smoke in the basement because it's a trapped connection. So in that case, we recommended the city going out and doing that CCTV work to really understand, before you go out and just start doing projects anywhere, what are the worst areas? Which street have the worst infrastructure? Again, not just for CSOs and extraneous water, but you don't want a pipe to break. Because if you have a pipe break, then people have wastewater backing up in their homes. So it's good to understand your infrastructure. So, but we did definitely found some areas when we looked at it. So, yeah. Yes.
Chris, you mentioned sump pumps on several occasions. How do you identify that, and how do you deal with it? You just mentioned cameras. Maybe that's the way you identify it. I don't know.
Actually, I mean, the best way to probably identify a sump pump is, well, go in people's basement.
Right.
And so that's one way. Another way is if you're doing TV inspections during wet weather, as I mentioned before, you see a bunch of clean water coming out. So that's either some type of foundation drain, or depending on the elevation of the home, a sump pump.
Okay.
So, but there's really no way really from aside of that to know for sure.
Curious.
Yeah.
Some towns tax that. You know, there's a fee that if you want to put fresh water into the sanitary, that you have to pay to do it.
I got one for you, Bill.
That you know where it is, or you have something?
What do we tell our citizens what are they going to do with their sump pumps that can no longer drain into the sewer? It's going to out the side of their house, onto the street, and then down the street back into the sewer?
Well, we're not proposing that because it is complicated, especially in a city like that we have a lot of ledge. And
there's a lot of basement drains too, I guess.
Yeah.
I kind of.
So we've talked about it, but we haven't gone to that level yet. Certainly, we'd rather that people weren't putting fresh water into our system because we're then paying to treat it.
I mean, it's something you guys have looked at.
It's not legal. Well, the codes say you can't do it, but the fact of the matter is it's common. There's probably more houses that have that situation than don't.
Well, we certainly don't want to solve one problem to create another. So
we're not proposing that at this time.
But if you contemplate doing a sump pump removal program, you need to really look at every lot individually. Is there a place that I can put this that isn't going to upset someone? Because if they do, they're just going to, the minute you leave, they're going to reconnect it to the sewer connection, which still exists. Oftentimes what you need to do is if there isn't a stormwater drain or catch basin network on a particular street, you would need to provide that, separated from the wastewater, and be able to put in stormwater lines so people have a place for their sump pumps to drain to. It really gets down to lot-by-lot solutions, and it is not always the best solution. Sometimes it is, but it isn't always.
Good answer.
Yeah.
I want to mention just one of them, Chris. Chris mentioned the CSO master plan a number of times, and I just want to sort of expand on that. The city has, through its wastewater treatment plant, we have a license with DEP to operate that treatment plant. And there are conditions that come with that license. And one of them is that we submit a CSO master plan. And what that master plan is it's a list of projects going out into the future where we know we have problems. And we try to identify projects working with them. That's why they do the studies to see where we have areas. And then we report those to DEP. And then we commit to a time frame to implement those projects. So we are, through the most latest submission, we are locked in to implementing those projects. And that's why we come forward either through budget or through grants trying to implement certain projects. That's where the impetus is, because we have committed to doing those projects, partly because they're a problem, but partly because we're being required to do it. So when we come during budget time for certain projects, we've already made commitments that we're going to do this. So we would be in violation of our license if we don't do those projects. So I'm only mentioning that because you'll be hearing about that in not too long. So that's the importance of the CSO master plan.
Just, Peter, right off of that, because the CSO plan gets updated every 5 years, is it understood that those projects should be done in 5 years, or are those separate timelines with each project?
Well, similar to the table you saw up there, what we do is we put timelines to the projects, and they'll be 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15.
Okay.
The 0 to 5 are the ones you really got to accomplish. Like Chris alluded to, once you get 5 years out, you reassess those projects. You find new ones that weren't on the radar screen before that are more important than the one you identified, or you find that a problem you did earlier fixed some other problem that you identified. So those projects can be juggled around.
Okay.
But the 0 to 5, or from now to the next 5 years out, those are the ones we're pretty much in agreement to. And our license will stipulate this project will be done, as you've submitted.
Okay.
So, we've run into situations where we've contacted DEP and said, we're not going to get to that one because of whatever. We've discovered something that's much worse.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And when we do that, we're asking them to wait, because we've agreed to do it. If for some reason we can't, or there's usually a good reason, then they work with us. But we are, we are under the gun, so to speak. I mean, you get to operate these facilities, but they're licensed, and you have to meet the standards and the conditions that they've put on your license. So we're working with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any questions before we finish up? I know it's quite a topic, but it's something that we can see the direct impact of, and we, as Peter was saying, we've seen it in our lifetime. And there was a time where you did not put your feet in this river, and there were no birds, and there was not much for wildlife. And now you can just go down the Kennebec anytime and see an eagle, and that's because communities were forced to do this, which was a good thing for us to be forced to do. It's expensive to live on the planet, so we got to take care of her. Without any other questions, I will thank you all for coming tonight, and I'll be in touch with what's coming up in the future. Okay.
By the way, that finance committee meeting tomorrow is postponed for a week because of the storm.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And
Good
if
luck.
you had
Let's hope.
that-
Let's hope this storm is like the last one we didn't get.